All right, welcome to Senior English B. We're now working with the Romantic poet William Blake. You will want to have your hymnal open right now, please, to 754. We will spend our time there as we are talking about romantics and more particularly the romantic vision of William Blake. So go ahead and go to 754 now. I just want to pick up on what we said yesterday, though. And again, now, just to remind, you ought to have your annotations in front of you, and you should be working now with in-class notes. We just got through talking about all these, deadlines that are coming on Tuesday, and it's really important that you're able to show me in red ink what you did before you came to class, and now what we're doing in blue or black ink in class. So you ought to be working right now in blue or black ink, and I recommend that right now you have the notes from 752 to 753. Remember, I asked you to bullet point that 752 to 753. That's where we are right now. The first thing I want to point out is that if you're taking these annotative notes, you want to make sure always, see on page 752, you always want to make sure you put the author's dates down. If you haven't done that, add that now. Again, you're working in blue or black ink. This tells me stuff that you're doing in class. Let's say, for example, that you did write down the dates of Blake there on page 752. Now you would be starring that or circling that or whatever in blue or black ink. Why? Because we call that match information. Something you wrote down that I also mentioned, and that means it's possible it could be on the exam. Would it shock you if, for example, one of the questions on the exam was, what were the dates for William Blake? See, that's not going to shock you, right? Because I just mentioned Blake just now in dates. Question, observation, Nelson.
Which dates? Like the birthday?
Yes, do you see, that's a great question. Do you see on page 752 where it says his name, and then do you see the dates right under it? That's the dates I'm talking about. Thank you, Mr. Nelson, for that clarification. That's the dates I'm talking about. Outstanding. What I'd recommend that you do, then, is find a single date that works fairly well for Blake, and it's a nice, easy, round figure. And I would recommend the year 1800. As we said yesterday, that's a simple, round date for us to kind of lock in our mind. Now, yesterday we defined romanticism as what? Jot it down on your paper there on these notes of 752 to 753. What do we mean when we talk about a romantic writer? We're not talking about somebody that necessarily has fallen in love, right? Not romantic like that. Then what does it mean from our comments of yesterday? If you have to look back to your notes of yesterday, feel free to do that, just to try to catch up with what we said yesterday. Romantics have a certain view of human nature that we will qualify as what? Idealism. That's right, idealistic, right? In other words, they say about human nature that human nature has a certain kind of inherent value to it, right? Humans are inherently divine, good, etc., but can be corrupted in some way. Now, Blake is interesting in this regards. He's going to look at life, the experience of life, and he's going to try to qualify it in some way. He's going to try to explain it in some way. And the way he's going to do this is by publishing, he did a number of ways, but we'll focus on, he publishes 2 collections of poems. 2 groups of poems. Maybe we would even call it 2 books of poems. All right? Now, what are those 2 books of poems that he publishes? Don't say it, write it. You've already got this written in your red ink, then you'll circle it or whatever. He calls them not poems. What's he call them? He calls them songs, right? He calls them songs. And what's interesting about these poems, these songs, is they come across initially almost like children's ditties, don't they? Like really kind of simple, and yet we're going to notice that Blake is a tremendous philosopher of the human experience. He's going to say some really challenging things for us today. But what are these 2 songs collections? The first one is what? Songs of Innocence. Let's get that word written down and go ahead and define it real quickly. How do you define the word innocence? Like, what does that word mean to you? If you say about someone that they are innocent, what does that mean? Okay. And then what's the second collection? Songs of experience. Yes, songs of experience. And go ahead and try and define that one as well. And more particularly, Mr. Durant, what we're interested in here is trying to think about the difference between the two. What is the difference between innocence and experience? So we might even ask Mr. Harder, for example, which comes first? Innocence or experience? See, we can kind of start to ask that. We can also ask a question like, which is more important? Innocence or experience? See, I'm asking questions that you may be jotting down. If you could only have one, which would you prefer to have? Innocence or experience? It's awfully hard to answer a question like that without defining what we mean by innocence and experience. Let's define real quickly. Mr. Judice, when you hear this phrase, innocence, we know what it means in a court of law to say, I am innocent, without what? What does that mean? In a court of law, what's it mean to say, I am innocent? Without guilt, right, without guilt. But what does it mean when we say about someone, he or she is innocent?
I don't know, like I think of it as like being pure and
Pure, let's write that one down. Pure, that's a really important one. Keep going. Pure.
pure and unknowing.
Unknowing, that's a huge one. The study of knowledge, epistemology. The innocent doesn't know. We even use this word, don't we? Naive, right? Naive. These poor little freshmen coming into Warland High, we might say. They're somewhat naive. We are reminded, of course, of 4 years ago when it was us, right? Right, same project. You think you know things, but you really don't know things, right? That's innocence. Mr. Nelson?
Well, couldn't innocence also be described as true knowledge?
In what regards?
When you're innocent, you're looking at the world in the simplest light.
Let's use this academic word, pristine. Pristine, outstanding, Mr. Nelson. You bet. And this will be part of the debate about which is better, to have a pure view of things or a somewhat jaded view of things, right?
Yeah.
You could argue that freshmen kind of have it figured out. They really do come into this building going, yay, or some version of that, right? Unless they've already been somewhat jaded, right? For example, most kindergartners, are you ready for this? Want to go to school. Isn't that a wild thing? They actually want to. They get up in the morning on the first day of school, kindergartners, they're like, yay, right? Their new backpack and their new clothes, and right? By the time you're a senior, let's go to the second word, experience. How you want to define that? Experience.
Tainted.
Been there, done that. I love it, Keller. That's a good one. That's a good way to say it. Been there, done that. Bought the t-shirt to prove it. Yeah, that's what we mean. Experience. You've had some kind of relationship to an event that you can somehow call on or remember. Let's point out that by its very word, the word experience seems to suggest a change. How so? Change epistemologically. How so? I said epistemology, ever relating to knowing, right? Once you have experience, you know something in a different way. The day before you started your freshman year at Warland High, or wherever you started it, you had a certain understanding of what it meant. Then you have the experience. Now you have a different view, right? Now it is the case that often with experience comes what? What would you say? With experience comes what? What is lost with experience?
Purity.
Purity, innocence, naivete. Of course, we immediately have the tendency to always think in this discussion about sexuality. That would make sense, obviously. And no doubt Blake will very much be tuned into that one. That's a simple way to kind of think about this difference between innocence and experience, right? But Blake's going to expand this notion to all of life. And he's going to have us think about the different ways that there's, are you ready for this now for your notes? Two sides of nature. Two permeation sides of nature. One of the ways he does this, and quite brilliantly, because it's so simple, I mean, it seems so childlike even in the presentation style, is for him to look at two animals. One animal we will look at on page 754 is the lamb. The other animal we will look at on page 758 is, of course, the tiger. Right? Notice these two poems find themselves in two different collections of poems. Right? Songs of Innocence, the lamb. Songs of Experience, the tiger. Correct? Now, what we will want to point out as we work at level 2 is the way in which Blake seems to be making observations about Worland High School. Blake seems to be making observations about students at Worland High School when he uses the lamb and the tiger. He's going to use these two animals, are you ready for this, at 2b? He's going to use these animals as symbols. Now, I don't mean symbols like in a band, do I? That's a different word, right? That's the C symbol. I'm talking the S symbol. What do I mean when I use the word symbol? What does that even mean? What is a symbol? Something representing something else, right? Something representing something else. So if we were to ask this question, and we will, and then we'll try and answer it. Is it true that there's two types of people at Worland High School? At least two. Okay? Blake will say, I think there's at least two types of people. One represented by a lamb, the other represented by a tiger. Let's take a look at both these poems real quickly and get a sense of it. I'm on page 754, the lamb. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Gave thee clothing of delight, soft as clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Go ahead and reduce all of the first stanza to a single line for yourself at level 1. What's the question? Notice he's speaking directly to a lamb. Notice it's a little lamb, right? And he asks a really interesting question. What is the question that he asks to this lamb? Do you know where you came from? Do you know where you came from? Which is an interesting question to ask a lamb. Now, I've had people who have spent time around sheep who will say, these are the most disgusting animals on the planet. They are painfully stupid. Painfully stupid. I mean, I've had a person who spent a lot of time herding sheep who said, you cannot find on the planet a more stupid animal than a lamb. I mean, they are just, of course, they're cutesy and how good are they at defending themselves? Yeah, virtually useless, right? I mean, they have no clue how to defend, right? I mean, without support, help, protection, these animals die almost immediately, right? Okay? And yet, notice the question in the first stanza is, do you know who made you? And now, follow the answer, second stanza, the answer. Little lamb, I'll tell thee, little lamb, I'll tell thee, he is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek, he is mild, he became a little child, I a child, and thou a lamb. We are called by his name, little lamb, God bless thee, little lamb, God bless thee. Put it in your own words. What does he reference in the second stanza that's clearly of Christian derivation? What is going on here? Who is this, he became a little child and all of that? What are we talking about here? Do I get any of us that attended Sunday school to know what we're talking about, Mr. Judice?
He's talking about Jesus.
He is, right? He's making a reference to the Christian Christ, correct? Who, of course, is even sometimes pictured in children's Bibles carrying a small lamb, right? Okay, a little baby lamb and all of that. Let's point out something about the tone of this poem real quickly. The tone of the poem. How it sounds when we read it out loud. What do you point out about the tone? Mr. Rothler, what do you want to say about the tone of this poem?
I don't know, just like really questioning.
It's questioning. Keep going. Say it out loud, Mr. Brown.
It's soft.
Soft, isn't it? Very, what would we say it? Innocent, right? Very, almost would we say, childlike. In fact, Mr. Brown, did you notice when I read that poem, you have a tendency when you read it out loud to even kind of read it in a little kid voice. Did you notice that? The very diction itself kind of requires that simple little rhythm, the simple little meter and rhyming. All of that makes this poem almost like a little children's nursery rhyme. Do you know who made you? I'll tell you who made you. You know, that kind of thing, right? Okay? Very innocent, very gentle, we might say, right? Okay? Now, that's one poem. That's Songs of what? Innocence. Now the other poem, oh, by the way, Mr. McGee, are these all the poems from Songs of Innocence and Songs from Experience? They're not, right? We know that Blake wrote many, many more of these poems. They just give you the high watermarks, and the lamb and tiger are always juxtaposed. What does that word mean, juxtaposed? Compared against each other. Compared against each other. It will make sense. Let's now take a look from Songs of Experience at the tiger. And by the way, Blake is playing a game of using an antiquated spelling. That's why I is in fact Y here, okay? Tiger. Look what he says about the tiger. Read with me on 758. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Put it in your own words. What's the first question? Notice that this is also a stanza just like the first one of the Lamb that asks a question. It's a similar question, isn't it, Mr. Keeley? What's the question? Who made this tiger? Who made this tiger? Right? Keep going. In what, notice it's a series of questions, by the way. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? What is the emphasis of the tiger here? Jot down, what is he focusing on? In each one of these stanzas, he looks at a different element of the tiger. Mr. Ramos, years ago, I was at a park. I think it was the one in Omaha. They have a large cat holding there. We were on the other side of the park in the late afternoon, and I heard this sound. It was a loud sound. And I went, no way. And I asked one of the workers who's standing there, what is that? And he goes, oh, they're about to start feeding the cats. If you hurry, you get over there, you might get to see this. We run across this huge park to get over there. And as we get closer and closer, this sound is getting louder and louder. I'm probably 100 feet from the actual holding pin. And we stop, and I can feel the reverberation through the cement coming up of this loud sound of these cats who are doing the sound of growling and that kind of thing. One of the workers is there, and I walk up to him as I get to watch them just destroy the meat they are given. Destroy it. And I ask the guy, I go, oh, this is something. He goes, yeah, imagine being out on the Serengeti and hearing that when there ain't no bars to protect you from those animals. Of course, what do we know about tigers? They are the killer shark of land, aren't they? They are the fundamental killing machine. If you've ever tried to pick up a kitten who didn't want picked up, multiply that by, what, 1,000 pounds? And then all of a sudden, of course, a tiger's way, way faster and quicker than any kitten you've ever tried to pick up. That's a tiger. The question here that Blake will ask is, who would make such an animal? Who would make such a creature? Such a violent, right? Mean, well, we'll keep reading. And what shoulder and what art? I mean, a tiger's paw is larger sometimes than the width of this podium right here, and it could just jack you, completely cut you in half, right? We have lots and lots of examples of this. In my youth, I lived in Asia for a while and lived in Singapore. The Straits Times told of a story about a tiger that had killed 8 men that had gone after it, as in altogether 8 men, as in all 8 of them were attacking this tiger. They didn't have firearms. They had, sticks with some kind of metal on the end of them. And swords didn't work so well. The tiger got the best of all 8 of them. And he had been coming into these compounds and he had been eating, dragging away children and that kind of thing. Fairly large. He could drag away an entire grown man. That's how big this tiger was. This is the question here. Tremendous power in his shoulders or whatever. Keep reading. When thy heart began to beat, look at what he concentrates here. What dread hand, what dread feet. What the hammer, what the chain, and what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp, dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears. Interesting question. Did he smile his work to see? And now the fundamental question of the tiger, did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Notice the verb dare. Dare. Blake almost seems to be saying, this is close to irreverent, isn't it? To a creator of the tiger, how dare you make such an animal? Right? Now, simple question. Put a lamb and a tiger in the same cage, what's going to happen? Right? You don't imagine that tiger's going to run over to the corner and like start to cower. Way wrong answer, right? Right? Interesting thing, that tiger didn't need any kind of tutorials, did he? Right? To know what he's supposed to do with that lamb, right? It's instinct, isn't it? Total instinct. He's going to jack, even if he's a young tiger, he's still going to jack that lamb and say, thank you for, my popcorn with the with the movie type thing, right? Okay, see? I mean, it's total instinct for him. Blake's question is what? Can you put it in your own words now? Obviously, at line 20, he asks it, did he who make the lamb make thee? Can you formalize that question in your own mind, though? What is it that Blake is really asking about human life, and more particularly, the symbols of both the lamb and the tiger? What is the question that he's asking about human life? What question is he asking about Orland High School? By the way, Mr. Brown, did you notice that this question, these two poems, when they're juxtaposed, seem to take our little diagram from yesterday about human nature, where we drew the line? Remember? What do these two poems taken side by side seem to do? What do they seem to demonstrate? Where would you put the tiger? You're right. Mr. Frederick puts his hands up like both sides. Where would you put the tiger? On which side of the line would you put the tiger? For human nature. Yeah, pretty scary, right? And then the lamb goes on that other side, sweet, innocent, right? What point is Blake making about human existence? What point is Blake making about nature? And it's here yesterday that I referenced Mr. Keeley's tattoo. Now I'll let him show it to you because it's a wonderful one. Go ahead, Mr. Keeley. Just hold your arm up for a second. Take a look at this tattoo, and you will identify, if you can turn so they can all see, Mr. Keeley. And if you will identify, there's a symbol that Mr. Keeley wears on his arm that Blake was very familiar with. Go ahead and draw that symbol on your notes if you know what I'm talking about. That symbol is what we call the yin-yang symbol of Chinese Taoism. It is an ancient symbol, right? Are you familiar with it, Mr. Judice? We've seen it on skateboards, on surfboards a lot, don't we? It's a very popular symbol, right? A circle, correct? A circle with kind of like an S through it. On one side of the circle, all black. On the other side of the circle, all white, right? And yet smaller circles inside of each one, correct? So that we have an interesting kind of understanding. This, notice, correct? What point does a symbol like this make in regards to Blake's two poems? Say it out loud, Mr. Keeler. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have light without dark, right? Cannot have one without the other. Innocence, experience. This is an interesting set of poems for us to be studying in our first week as seniors. You are now seniors. You have spent some time at Orland High. Let's go ahead and ask the question for your notes. As you walked the halls of Orland High School, did you find that in fact there are two kinds of people at Orland High School? There are lambs and there are tigers. Do you find that to be the case at all? That humans at Orland High School have certain kinds of personality tendencies. They either are the ones with claws or the ones that are kind of gentle and, Another way to say this is, there's the jacked, right? And then there's the ones doing the jacked, right? You can write it in your notes. How would you phrase it? There's the victim, right? And there's the perpetrators of the victim. Different ways to think of it. Now, about that kind of paradigm, we'll ask a question. If we can use tiger and lamb as a personality type, are tigers types born that way? Or are they made that way through a series of experiences? The poor victims of Warland High, who just seem to keep getting jacked over and over again, are these poor lambs born that way? Or early on did they kind of learn to play the role of victim? To accept passively violence done to them in any number of ways, physical, otherwise? Notice recently, in the last few years, since you've been in Warland High School, right? There's been this tendency on the part of adults in this building to want to talk about bullying. Are you familiar with this phrase? Bullying, right? You're all familiar. Bullying. What would Blake say about a bully? He'd call him a tiger. And what would Blake say about the one being bullied? Call him a lamb. Right? You put a tiger and a lamb in a cage, the tiger's going to jack the lamb. Trying to tell the tiger to be nice. What? How would you say this? Trying to tell the tiger to be nice. You don't be mean to that lamb. How's that going to work out? Well, if he's a really smart tiger, he'll go, okay, put another lamb in here so I can try to be nice some more. Wham! Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. See, we can start asking questions. Of the two personality types, which one's smarter? Which one's more intelligent? Lambs are just kind of stupid? Question, can a lamb become a tiger? Can a lamb become a tiger? Or in the end, are these personality types kind of like almost DNA genetically driven, and that's just the way it is? You can't change this. You can try, but you can't change it.
Well, sometimes the tiger can pretend that it's a lamb.
Ooh, which would be right. It can look really. No, I'm very nice. Wait. Let me be nice to you. Are you saying that there are some freshmen who are now starting to learn this nasty little truth that just because a senior shows interest does not always mean? Oh yeah. See, we've watched this drama unfold, haven't we? No, the freshman girl. No, he really likes me. Sure he does. You bet he. Tigers love lambs. It's not like that. Oh, you don't know. Oh, okay. No, notice how seniors just kind of look at that project with a certain kind of skepticism. Yeah, you may be right, but I'm inclined to think tigers know how to jack lambs. That's what they do. And whether you want to admit that's what's going on or not doesn't change the fact that's what's going on. Whoa, wait a minute. Is that a dark, skeptical view? And can anybody put a positive spin on this for me? Can anybody say, dude, if we were all a bunch of lambs, nobody ever steps a foot on the moon. Nobody ever builds the projects that we're so proud of in our human experience. Right? You had to have somebody that kept working at it. Edison in his lab for hours working, correct? Einstein didn't give up. He kept going, working. That motorcycle Mr. Harder drove this morning to school was put together by not a lamb. That was some mental tiger that put that project together, right? Right? So which is better? If you could go back to a moment of innocence in your youth, when you knew absolutely nothing, when you were a true lamb in every way, is that a better place to be than to be here now, where you kind of are jaded because you know a few things? Which is better? Better to go back?
I'm sorry, I've been sitting with the tiger.
Keeley says, I ain't interested in going back to being no lamb. Why not? Because there's tigers in the world, or what?
Yeah, as a lamb, you get taken down.
You get jacked if you are a lamb. People take advantage of you. Much better to be a tiger. Mr. Keeley says.
Well, isn't it also true that you don't find what you're not looking for?
Which is to say, in the end, all lambs want to get jacked by the tiger.
Or,
They just don't know it.
well, you're in a community, you won't find the hardships or the trials if you're not going out there looking for them. You won't find the bad neighborhood if you're not out there looking for it. If you're just blissfully oblivious,
What if it comes to you?
then you're blissfully oblivious and you don't actually recognize it.
Take a look at 760 real quick. Sick Rose. Blake says to a beautiful, healthy rose, "You're about to get jacked." Blake will say it in a different poem this way: "The only difference between you and the fly is you know about fly swatters." I'll say it again. It's a powerful observation. Blake says the only difference between you and a fly is that you know about fly swatters. The fly doesn't. The fly's just kind of buzzing around, right? All of a sudden, wham! That's the end of that experience, right? You, on the other hand, know about fly swatters. What do we mean by that? All humans are aware that in our town, there's a plot of ground sits right outside of town where people, right, get buried. You got it. Thanks, guys. Come back tomorrow. We'll do a little bit more work.